What's up, everyone? Everett Capote, egoproctor here. Having some tongue issues, apparently. So as you can see, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to start experimenting with a series of putting some knowledge from the 21st century over the top of Alan Watts' research during the 20th century about the past. And we'll see if I can make, he has 12 talks here. So we'll see if I can complete all 12 before I have to move on to the next destination.
I find it a little difficult to say what the subject matter of this seminar is going to be, because it's too fundamental to give it a title. I'm going to talk about what there is. Now, the first thing, though, that we have to do is to get our perspectives with some background about the basic ideas which, as Westerners living today in the United States, influence our everyday common sense, our fundamental notions about what life is about. And there are historical origins for this, which influence us more strongly than most people realize. Ideas of the world, which are built into the very nature of the language we use, and of our ideas of logic and of what makes sense altogether. And these basic ideas I call myth, not using the word myth to mean simply something untrue, but to use the word myth in a more powerful sense. A myth is an image, in terms of which we try to make sense of the world. And we at present are living under the influence of two very powerful images, which are, in the present state of scientific knowledge, inadequate. And one of our major problems today is to find an adequate, satisfying image of the world. Well, that's what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to go further than that, not only what image of the world to have, but how we can get our sensations and our feelings in accordance with the most sensible image of the world that we can manage to conceive. All right, now, the two images which we have been working under for 2,000 years and maybe more are what I would call two models of the universe. And the first is called the ceramic model, and the second, the fully automatic model. The ceramic model of the universe is based on the book of Genesis, from which Judaism, Islam, and Christianity derive their basic picture of the world. And the image of the world in the book of Genesis is that the world is an artifact. It is made. As a potter takes clay and forms pots out of it, or as a carpenter.
Okay, so in this part, he's talking about creation mythology. Let's take a break just for a second, and I'm going to show you some books. So you can go to lulu.com. Let's go to here first, mythopedia.info. This is Marinus Anthony van der Sloos's website. He finally got his books page up and running, I think. And so as you can see, it's traditional cosmology is the global mythology of cosmic creation and destruction. And this has to do with Anthony Pratt and his work. My YouTube channel is having some problems, so we'll see if that's still okay. So I've got it here, Pratt and the petroglyphs. It's banking. We'll look at this later. So this is Pratt and the petroglyphs, talking about the solar flares that hit the planet about 13,000 years ago. Okay. So I can add that in. But here at my web on this website, I haven't put the YouTube video in yet, but I can. Here's the evidence of the solar flares. And if we look, we're looking at about 13,000 years ago is the estimated time when the solar flares hit based on a lot of data. You can look at this. If you understand the science, you can look at it, or you can at least kind of scan through it and look for keywords that you'll recognize, like ice core samples and global fires. And a lot of good work in science went into dating this, and it's been in lots and lots of sources, right? If you really wanted to do your due diligence on this, you would dig through all of these papers that he has and read all of the references to then get an idea of what he's talking about here. Okay. So the solar flare event created what we would call high energy plasma discharges in the sky and on Earth. Getting into all the details of it is more than I want to do in this video, but I just want to show you these resources so you can review them at a later date. So egoproctor.simple is my website that I've got this information up at. And so just to kind of show you, this is what the aurora borealis looks like. There's energy coming in from the sun that rotates up at the top of the Earth and makes the northern lights. And as Peratt talks about in the video, these forms are made in high energy plasma discharges. So plasma, we can go to, let's see, ignore the Wikipedia, the main Wikipedia about plasma cosmology. Because Wikipedia is a disinformation site. Okay. So plasma, under standard scientific theory, plasma is just a really hot like gas, which is not right at all by any stretch. Plasma is a electromagnetic system under phenomenal experiment. It's a gas in which the atoms either have too many electrons or the electrons have been stripped away. Largely, it's a hydrogen system. So it's what in standard physics you would call a proton and an electron. But we'll get into why, with this Alan Watts talk, we'll get into why that's just not feasible, why those things just don't exist, protons and electrons. And I can show you the evolution, at least where to start looking to get an idea of the evolution of these ideas of science. And so we have fire, we have aurora, and here's the different types of plasma. And there's different topics that you can dig into about how galaxy formation works. We can get in later into why this is at all scales of matter. And we can see Eric Ryder's experiments that demonstrate that the photon doesn't exist. And through seeing that the photon doesn't exist, we can show that atoms don't exist. Okay, so that's plasmauniverse.com. And this is part of the structures that are made with very high energy plasma physics. And all of creation mythology is talking about when that happened. And so people carved it on rock. You can see those shapes and more. They did almost 2 decades of study now on these rock carvings as compared to the rock art. And this is the global mythology. 425 areas of agreement between all global mythology, except for maybe a few. And you get the origin of creation stories and why Genesis, part of the reason why Genesis is talking about making things out of clay. But we can get into that later. Let's see. I'm only going to do about 15 or 20 minutes of this talk and then take a break and then do it again and then finish up with more talks.
Takes wood and makes tables and chairs out of it. Don't forget, Jesus is the son of a carpenter and also the son of God. So the image of God and of the world is based on the idea of God as a technician, potter, carpenter, architect, who has in mind a plan and who fashions the universe in accordance with that plan. So basic to this image of the world is the notion, you see, that the world consists of stuff, basically. Primordial matter, substance, stuff, as parts are made of clay. And the potter imposes his will on it and makes it become whatever he wants. And so in the book of Genesis, the Lord God creates Adam out of the dust of the earth. In other words, he makes a clay figurine, and then he breathes into it, and it becomes alive. Because the clay becomes informed. By itself it is formless, it has no intelligence, and therefore it requires an external intelligence and an external energy to bring it to life and to put some sense into it. And so in this way, we inherit a conception of ourselves as being artifacts, as being made, and it is perfectly natural in our culture for a child to ask its mother, how was I made? Or who made me? And this is a very, very powerful idea, but for example, it is not shared by the Chinese or by the Hindus. A Chinese child would not ask its mother, how was I made? A Chinese child might ask its mother, how did I grow? Which is an entirely different procedure from making. You see, when you make something, you put it together, you arrange parts, or you work from the outside to the in, as a sculptor works on a stone, or as the potter works on clay. But when you watch something growing, it works in exactly the opposite direction. It works from the inside to the outside. It expands, it burgeons, it blossoms.
Okay, so if you want to experience this for yourself, then it'll take a little while to get through if you haven't done this kind of work before. Look up Yoga with Adrienne. She's put together a true series. I tell people sometimes that it was lightly inspired by me. I mean, I rode my bicycle down from Chicago down here to Austin, Texas, and I met her. And so she goes through these yoga. It's 30 days of yoga, and it's fairly gentle. And she'll keep reminding you through the series that what you're doing is you're activating your internal organs through these works. Through the stretches, through the moves, you're stretching the muscles, you're moving the bones around, getting the ligaments and tendons. But there's also an energy that would be called prana. But that modern science, people want to try to call it fringe science, but there really isn't any validation to do that. About, let me see. No, I don't want Chinese websites. About our bioplasma body. And so when she's talking about prana, what they're finding is we can measure the energy field in the body. And so the prana is going to be the energy moving out throughout the system. You got the kundalini, and then would be the two coiled, we would call them Birkeland currents in plasma physics, moving up the spine, and there's energy moving up and down the spine. And that where these Birkeland currents meet, you then have chakras. And this is also, if you when you look at Rens van der Sloos's work on plasma cosmology, I'm actually dealing with that right now in traditional cosmology. And then he'll get into sections where the tree of life was considered to be, let's see if we can, it says the two extensions is the wings of a bird at the summit of the column. And so people would see this in the sky. This was part of the creation mythology of the plasma physics I was talking about, is that this form was actually seen in the sky, but it's also something very similar to the energy fields in our body. All right, so this gets into some what are we kind of questions. Okay. And I can put this link in the video description. But let's go back to Alan Watts.
And it happens all over itself at once. In other words, the original simple form, say, of a living cell in the womb, progressively complicates itself. And that's the growing process. And it's quite different from the making process. And so there is, for that reason, a fundamental difference between the made and the maker. And this image, this ceramic model of the universe, originated in cultures where the form of government was monarchical, and where, therefore, the maker of the universe was conceived also at the same time in the image of the king of the universe. King of kings, Lord of lords, the only ruler of princes, who dost from thy throne behold all dwellers upon earth. I'm quoting the Book of Common Prayer.
Okay, as far as records show, it looks like Sargon of Akkad in ancient Babylon, about 1,000 years before that was used, maybe 1,500 years. I can look up Sargon of Akkad. Right, so this is about 2400 BCE. This is about the same time banking takes over Babylon. And this is right about the end of cattle trade as the primary currency with interest-based currency. This is all right about the same time frame. So Sargon of Akkad, he was, as the rulers, if you look at Babylonian history and Egyptian history and other written histories we have, various rulers wanted to become like the gods. And as when you look at books like Traditional Cosmology or Peratt's work or any other large compendiums of comparative mythology in history, you'll see that people will praise their king like gods. And this is old. This is really old stuff. And it's because the formations out of here, people consider them to be alive, and they consider the solar flare, that these high energy plasma discharges and the effects they had that last for about 1,000 years, to be gods and then to be living entities. And so the human kings would style themselves out of what they saw in the sky and declared themselves gods because they ruled over this city. And so Sargon of Akkad, if you look up his, named himself the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and all of that fun. And so that's where that begins. That's the historical origins of that, of what he just quoted from the Book of Common Prayer.
And so all those people who are oriented to the universe in that way feel related to basic reality as a subject to a king. And so they are on very, very humble terms in relation to whatever it is that works all this thing. I find it odd in the United States that people who are citizens of a republic have a monarchical theory of the universe. Because we are carrying over from the very ancient Near Eastern cultures the notion that the Lord of the universe must be respected in a certain way. People kneel, people bow, people prostrate themselves. Because, and you know what the reason for all that is, that nobody is more frightened of everybody else than a tyrant. He sits with his back to the wall, and his guards on either side of him. And he has you face downwards on the ground because you can't use weapons that way. When you come into his presence, you don't stand up and face him because you might attack. And he has reason to fear that you might because he's ruling you all. And the man who rules you all is the biggest crook in the bunch. Because he's the one who's succeeded in crime. The other people...
Okay. So with this, we could take a quick look at some books about money. Okay, so we look at Goatsman. Money Changes Everything. I have a video on this on my channel. I can add that here too in case you want to look at what the history of money was. But we've got in here, he shows us, tries to explain financial technology in terms of time as money and get us into that mindset, the similar kind of idea that Alan Watts is going to work us through that's just broken. And it shows us how money became, see, this is cuneiform. This is what they had in ancient Babylon. And what we'll see is not only did in Babylon the idea of writing become very, very much linked to keeping track of commodities and financial accounts, and also modeling time for growth and to help build cities. He'll talk about in here how cattle were the original tools of trade in Uruk, in this part of the world. And what ended up happening is all these merchants making silver lending, but first it began as cows. You'll see. And the word for interest is mosh. And so the cat, when you lent out 30 cows, they would give birth. And you would return the calves to that herd because they would give birth. And then herd would grow, and you expected all loans and all currencies to be able to grow. Well, when the Anatolian merchants tricked the people of Uruk, the Sumerian cultures, into using silver, silver can't breed. And banking, instead of it becoming what is essentially a reciprocal system of lending biological currency, livestock or something similar like grain that can grow itself, the Anatolian merchants turned finance into a criminal system. And so the kings of those empires were largely criminals that were running a money racket or connected to the money racket or in power because they were allowed to by the money racket, which first took over the temples before it took over everything else, is what it seems. Okay. And that was about the same time as Sargon of Akkad, about 2400 BCE. In that time frame is when silver becomes the primary currency in Babylon. Somewhere in there. You can read the book and find it. Money Changes Everything by William Goatsman.
People are pushed aside because the criminals, the people we lock up in jail, are simply the people who didn't make it. So naturally, the real boss sits with his back to the wall and his henchmen on either side of him. And so when you design a church, what does it look like? Catholic Church with the altar as it used to be. It's changing now because the Catholic religion is changing. But the Catholic Church has the altar with its back to the wall at the east end of the church. And there, the altar is the throne, and the priest is the chief vizier of the court, and he is making obeisance to the throne in front, but there is the throne of God, the altar. And all the people are facing it and kneeling down. And a great Catholic cathedral is called a basilica, from the Greek basileus, which means king. So a basilica is the house of a king. And the ritual of the Catholic Church is based on the court rituals of Byzantium. A Protestant church is a little different, but basically the same. The furniture of a Protestant church is based on a judicial courthouse. The pulpit. The judge in an American court wears a black robe. He wears exactly the same dress as a Protestant minister. And everybody sits in these boxes. Like there's a jury box, there's a box for the judge, there's a box for this, a box for that. And those are the pews in an ordinary kind of colonial type Protestant church. So both these kinds of churches, which have an autocratic view of the nature of the universe, decorate themselves, are architecturally constructed in accordance with political images of the universe. One is the king and the other is the judge, Your Honor. There's sense in this. When in court you have to refer to the judge as Your Honor, it stops the people engaged in litigation from losing their tempers and getting rude. There's a certain sense to that. But when you want to apply that image to the universe itself, to the very nature of life, it has limitations.
Okay, so if you paid attention, what he just said is there is no such thing as the separation of church and state. That is a useful fiction to allow people to opt out of the religion and still be a part of the entire system in which the real power structure is the church and the state. Essentially, what you look at when you look at Goatsman's book about Money Changes Everything, corporations have existed as the heads of state and banking inside of the religions and the politics since ancient Babylon, and that's essentially what's evolved into Christianity and Judaism. So we could look at that later, but for right now, let's... and Byzantium would be the Byzantine Empire. Its capital was connected to the Anatolian capital of merchants eventually. And then Constantinople became Istanbul, which is all part of Anatolia. That's essentially where all this banking mess started, and where a lot of the problems of today, you dig deep enough and you'll find that they still originate from there.
For one thing, the idea of a difference between matter and spirit. This idea doesn't work anymore. Long, long ago, physicists stopped asking the question, what is matter? They began that way. They wanted to know, what is the fundamental substance of the world? And the more they asked that question, the more they realized they couldn't answer it. Because if you're going to say what matter is, you've got to describe it in terms of behavior. And that is to say, in terms of form, in terms of pattern. You tell what it does. You describe the smallest shapes of it that you can see. Atoms, electrons, protons, mesons, all sorts of sub-nuclear particles. But you never arrive at the basic stuff. Because there isn't any. What happens is this. Stuff is a word for the world as it looks when our eyes are out of it.
Okay, so this is kind of correct. We don't know what it is. But what he's talking about, if you look at Dewey's work, you can look up a video of his on YouTube where he talks about this. But essentially, you can start with this book, Basic Properties of Matter. It's mostly a philosophical book, or actually nothing but motion here. And it's mostly a philosophical book. You could jump to The Case Against the Nuclear Atom. And you essentially get the idea that in the center of an atom, as we call it, would be a photon, and that's all there is. And the spinning of the photon aggregates extra energy in what they call standing waves in science. And we get what's been named the electron shells. But if we look here, this is where we're starting to see the funny of science. Is that this man, George Johnstone Stoney, used math and deductive logic to invent the concept of an electron. But J.J. Thomson and other physicists and electrical engineers were saying, no, that's not right. There are no electrons. And what ended up happening is, in order to force it to work, people who didn't want ether physics to become the primary physics, because it reveals too much about the nature of us, is they force this electron to become, right, the British Association of the Advancement of Science. Well, if you look into what Rupert Sheldrake's talking about with Science Set Free, it is the British Association for the Advancement of Science, or the British Association for Weights and Measures, and essentially British banking-run institutions that have made up crap like electrons. And because you don't make up a particle and then adjust the measurements of it because you found out that it's not real based on your math, that your mathematical predictions didn't estimate how much energy was going to be in this thing by as much as 16 times off. That's not a huge amount in the scale of energetic systems, but it's big enough that since this was made up with math first. And when you look at J.J. Thomson's work, like through Eric Dollard, and looking into it, J.J. Thomson will talk about the fact that electrons, the only thing that you could justify the electron as being is the death of electricity when it's being ripped apart, not that it's at an actual stable particle. So there is a lot of controversy here that people have ignored. And you get into Dewey B. Larson, gets into some of the cases that there is no nucleus in the atom. And then we could get into okay. Charles W. Lucas looks at isotopes and the mathematics related to isotopes and shows that there's no reason to assume that there's a neutron in or a strong force or a weak force. This is all just crap made up with mathematics. Right? No, that this is, and I've shown this to quantum physicists, and they're curious about why this works. So there's mathematical and analysis of experimental evidence from NIST that shows that there's no neutrons in the atom, no strong force, and no weak force. Well, if you can use this, and essentially what you're doing is you're taking the microelectron volts and you're converting them into atomic weight, and then measuring the estimated weight of the atom before and after the neutron was added or removed to go between isotopes. Well, if you can do that with a neutron, you can do it with the proton and the electron, because all they are is a microelectron. I mean, they're all going to be measured with microelectron volt or atomic mass, and positive and negative is just polarities. And boom, you have no subatomic particles in the atom. And as Dewey B. Larson shows, it's just a photon spinning inside the atom. But then we get into the work of Eric Reiter. And so Eric Reiter's work has falsified quantum mechanics by showing that even the photon isn't real. That the photon is, when two energy fields meet, and they'll meet at a 90-degree angle, they, around that intersection, I mean, I'll go ahead and call it a vortexal form, and then the photon is like a standing wave. It's just energy that's trapped in this resonant pattern around that central vortex, and then that continues to spin, and then you get Dewey B. Larson's model of the atom. And so it's not that Alan Watts said that we didn't figure out what matter was. It's that we've known for over 100 years what it was, because this is the work coming out of Tesla and Steinmetz and Heaviside and others from the 1880s and 1890s working with electricity found this out. But it was inconvenient for the bankers because it gave us all kinds of things, free energy and better medicine, and they buried it with language and propaganda. And Alan Watts didn't have access to this information back in the 30s and 40s and 50s when he was doing this work in the 60s. So that's what I'm saying, 21st century evidence to say, well, we understand what matter is now. And it goes back to ether physics. Okay.
Focus. Fuzzy. Stuff. The idea of stuff is that it's undifferentiated. It's some kind of a goo. And when your eyes are not in sharp focus, everything looks fuzzy. When you get your eyes into focus, you see a form, you see a pattern. And so all that we can talk about is patterns. So the picture of the world in the most sophisticated physics of today is not formed stuff, potted clay, but pattern. A self-moving, self-designing pattern. a dance. And we haven't yet, our common sense as individuals hasn't yet caught up with this. Well now, in the course of time, in the evolution of Western thought, the ceramic image of the world ran into trouble and changed into what I call the fully automatic model or image of the world. In other words, Western science was based on the idea that there are laws of nature. And it got that idea from Judaism and Christianity and Islam. That, in other words, the potter, the maker of the world, in the beginning of things, laid down the laws. And the law of God, which is also the law of nature, it's called the Logos. And in Christianity, the Logos is the second person of the Trinity, incarnate as Jesus Christ, who thereby is the perfect exemplar of the divine law. So we have tended to think of all natural phenomena as responding to laws, as if, in other words, the laws of the world were like the rails on which a streetcar or a tram or a train runs. And these things exist in a certain way, and all events respond to these laws. You know that limerick, there was a young man who said, "Damn, for it certainly seems that I am a creature that moves in determinate grooves. I'm not even a bus, I'm a tram." So, here's this idea that there's a kind of a plan, and everything responds and obeys that plan. Well, in the 18th century, Western intellectuals began to suspect this idea. What they suspected is whether there is a lawmaker, whether there is an architect of the universe. And they found out, or they reasoned, that you don't have to suppose that there is. Why? Because the hypothesis of God does not help us to make any predictions. In other words, let's put it this way. If the business of science is to make predictions about what's going to happen, science is essentially prophecy. What's going to happen? By studying the behavior of the past and describing it carefully, we can make predictions about what's going to happen in the future. That's really the whole of science. And to do this, and to make successful predictions, you do not need God as a hypothesis, because it makes no difference to anything. If you say everything is controlled by God, everything is governed by God, that doesn't make any difference to your prediction of what's going to happen. And so what they did was simply drop that hypothesis. But they kept the hypothesis of law. Because if you can predict, if you can study the past and describe how things have behaved, and you've got some regularities in the behavior of the universe, you call that law. Although it may not be law in the ordinary sense of the word, it's simply regularity. And so what they did was they got rid of the lawmaker and kept the law. And so they conceived the universe in terms of a mechanism. Something, in other words, that is functioning according to regular, clock-like mechanical principles. Newton's whole image of the world is based on billiards. The atoms are billiard balls, and they bang each other around. And so your behavior, every individual therefore is defined as a very, very complex arrangement of billiard balls, being banged around by everything else. And so behind the fully automatic model of the universe is the notion that reality itself is, to use the favorite term of 19th century scientists, blind energy. In, say, the metaphysics of Ernst Haeckel and T.H. Huxley, the world is basically nothing but blind, unintelligent force. And likewise, in parallel to this, in the philosophy of Freud, the basic psychological energy is libido, which is blind lust.
Okay, so we have a book here called The Music of the Spheres by Jamie James. And what he reminds us of is that Western science, up until Einstein came over and fucked everything up, we have the idea of Pythagoras. Okay, I'm trying to get, I can't see my camera. This is really a shitty system I've got set up here. But, so we have the idea of Pythagoras and the Pythagorean theorem of music and harmony and resonance being the basis for science. And that listening and observing reality was more important than mathematics, and that your mathematics was based on your observations of reality. You didn't use the mathematics to predict what you would observe later, because mathematics essentially is no different than a language. And if I can make up a Cinderella story with English, I can, or any other language, I can make up something similar with mathematics. It just takes a different form, which we saw with Ptolemaic geocentrism. When they used math, it was perfect in and of itself to describe the universe. But all it took was Galileo and a telescope to put that to bed. Right, so what he gets into, when he gets into the Hermetic tradition, he gets into how Pythagorean thought helped influence Hermeticism, which is essentially the occult. And out of that came Vincenzo Galilei. And so Vincenzo Galilei was Galileo's father, and he was a music teacher and music theory master. And he's the one that figured out that tightening the strings on an instrument will allow you to not have to use monochords. Monochords would be like a harp, where each string is its own tone, but it has to be a different length. And so Vincenzo Galilei came up with the inverse square rule, that by squaring the tension on the string of the same length, you could make different tones, just like a guitar. So Isaac Newton, in his alchemical books, remember, because Newton got most of his scientific understanding from experiments with alchemy. And he had alchemical journals that he kept along with his mathematics and physics journals. And out of his alchemical journals came the idea of the inverse square rule as related to gravity. So let's take a look at this. By what proportion gravity decreases by receding from the planets, the ancients have not sufficiently explained, yet they appear to have adumbrated, I don't know that word, adumbrated it by harmony of the celestial spheres, designating the Sun and the remaining 6 planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, by means of Apollo with the lyre of 7 strings, and measuring the intervals of the spheres by intervals of the tones. Thus they allege that 7 tones are brought into being, which they called the harmony diapason. Don't know that word either. And that Saturn moved by the Dorian thong, voice or mode, that is the heavy one, and the rest of the planets by sharper tones, as Plinky, okay. And that the sun strikes the strings. Hence, Macrobius, in Book 1, Chapter 19, says, Apollo's lyre of 7 strings provides understanding of the motions of all the celestial spheres over which nature has set the sun as moderator. And Proclus on Plato's Timaeus, Book 3, page 200, the number 7 they have dedicated to Apollo as to him who embraces all symphonies whatsoever. And therefore they used to call him the god of the Hebdomagates. These are words that I don't know. That is the prince of the number 7. Likewise, in Eusebius's preparation of the Gospel, Book 5, Chapter 14, the sun is called by the oracle of Apollo, the king of the seven sounding harmony. But by this symbol, they indicated that the sun, by his own force, acts upon the planets in that harmonic ratio of distances by which the force of tension acts upon strings of different lengths, that is reciprocally in the duplicate ratio of the distance. For the force by which the same tension acts on the same string of different lengths is reciprocally as the square of the length of the string. So what Newton was doing was digging through ancient Greek philosophy and mixing it with Pythagorean ideas and mixing it with alchemy and occult ideas that he'd been playing with and making up, and invented the idea of gravity as strings tied around the sun and the planets, and that each of them had a specific musical tone, and that the inverse square of the length of the string to the distance of the planet and the mass of the planet essentially created the idea of gravity, and that broke, right? That never worked, and it never has worked, but it's a useful mathematical fiction. As if you look in Rupert Sheldrake's talk, The Science Delusion, or Science Set Free, you'll see him talk about how it doesn't work, and that they measure gravity globally and they get different measurements and they homogenize. It means they mix all the data together, they homogenize it, and come out with a number that's pretty close to what Newton predicted, so they can keep this lie of Newton's gravity working. But if you look up Victor Schauberger, you can look at Victor Schauberger's works here on archive.org, and his book, Nature is Teacher, he goes into why here. In this book, he'll discuss gravity in a different sense, as you have motions vortexing down on the planet, but for every motion coming down, there has to be a motion coming up. But we are really only affected by the downward motion. But there are ways to catch that upward motion. The same way a trout can swim up a waterfall is what he had learned and pointed out, is that there are upward spiraling motions. We just have to build technology to take care of it. And that gravity is more of an issue of motion and not force. And that Newton's laws never really did function. Newton, in his Principia at the end, even admitted that gravity was probably an electromagnetic force, which is kind of what came out of Victor Schauberger's work with ether physics.
And it is only a fluke. It is only as a result of pure chances that, resulting from the exuberance of this energy, there are people with values, with reason, with languages, with cultures, and with love. Just a fluke. Like, 1,000 monkeys typing 1,000 typewriters for 1,000,000 years will eventually type the Encyclopedia Britannica. And of course, the moment they stop typing the Encyclopedia Britannica, they will relapse into nonsense. And so in order that that shall not happen, because you and I are flukes in this cosmos, and we like our way of life, we like being human, if we want to keep it, say these people, we've got to fight nature, because it'll turn us back into nonsense the moment we let it. And so we've got to impose our will upon this world as if we were something completely alien to it from outside. And so we get a culture based on the idea of the war between man and nature. And we talk about the conquest of space, the conquest of Everest. And the great symbols of our culture are the rocket and the bulldozer. The rocket, compensation for the sexually inadequate male. So we're going to conquer space. We're in space already, way out. If anybody cared to be sensitive and let what's outside space come to you, you can, if your eyes are clear enough. Aided by telescopes, aided by radio astronomy, aided by all the kind of sensitive instruments we can devise. We are as far out in space as we're ever going to get. But, sensitivity isn't the pitch. Especially in the WASP culture of the United States, we define manliness in terms of aggression. You see, because we're a little bit frightened as to whether we are really men. And so we put on this great show of being a tough guy. It's completely unnecessary. If you have what it takes, you don't need to put on that show. You don't need to beat nature into submission. Why be hostile to nature? Because after all, you are a symptom of nature. You, as a human being, you grow out of this physical universe in just exactly the same way that an apple grows off an apple tree. So let's say the tree which grows apples is a tree which apples, using apple as a verb. And a world in which human beings arrive is a world that peoples. And so the existence of people is symptomatic of the kind of universe we live in. Just as spots on somebody's skin are symptomatic of chickenpox.
Okay. So if you look up the epic of Gilgamesh, and there's various translations of it and depths of story. And they found new tablets, 1 or 2 new tablets. I think they found an extension of tablet 5 recently. What you get is that Gilgamesh was the king of Ur. He was the most powerful king, and he was essentially banging all the ladies and beating the shit out of all the guys, and he could conquer anybody, and he was just the perfect warrior man. Right? He was the perfect He-Man king. But he was also causing problems. So the gods decided to create Enkidu out of water, and Gilgamesh does not leave a girl to her mother. He's just fucking everything. Right? He's just taking his dick in anything that moves. And probably even fucking the moms and the grandmas too. Like, this guy's just out of control. And so to try to bring him back down to a manageable state, the gods decided to create Enkidu, right? And Enkidu was essentially connected to nature. He was 100% a part of nature. He couldn't understand language. He didn't understand how people lived. He ate grass and hung out by the watering hole. And one of the trappers found him, went back and told Gilgamesh. And so then Gilgamesh had this woman, Shamat, essentially go and suck and fuck Enkidu. And until he broke. And his mind was 6 days, right? She woke him up and he banged her for 6 days and 7 nights straight. This is like superhero fucking this whore, right? And she's a temple whore, right? So, and he just fucks this bitch till she's almost dead. Well, that breaks Enkidu out of his, and so they even call him a savage because he's part of nature. He lives with nature. He's one with nature. He understands nature. Well, so he goes back and he beats the hell out of Gilgamesh. And that's when Gilgamesh found out that he'd met his equal, and they become brothers. And so the gods talk about it, and they move on to go conquer nature, and they start killing all the big monsters of nature. And when they get to the end of it, just kind of skip through the story. When they get to the end of their adventures, the last big monster has a poison stinger or something and hits Enkidu, and Enkidu dies. And so Gilgamesh realizes he's lost his brother and goes chasing eternal life and meets I can't remember the guy's name, but it's essentially the Noah corollary in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And it's the guy who had survived the flood and lives forever. Gilgamesh wants to live forever, and then maybe he can find a way to undo the damage he's done by having Enkidu die and then essentially killing all of nature. And he's told he can't unless he does some kind of super task that's essentially impossible. And so then Gilgamesh eventually dies. And so what we get out of this is that this same thing Alan Watts is talking about, that we have to, that it's us against nature, that by us destroying nature, what we're essentially doing is destroying ourselves. And if we look at from like a Jungian psychology point of view, Enkidu is essentially the manifestation of Gilgamesh's shadow, his shadow self, his internal self, or his soul. And when he went to go conquer nature, he killed his soul. First, he corrupted his soul with lust and partying, and then he fought with it and worked with it to then destroy essentially everything the soul was made out of. And then he faded and died. And that's where we are right now. That's what we're dealing with right now. Even to the point that DARPA, fucking psychotic military, are putting biochips inside of soldiers and people to monitor their neurological activity, even experimenting with watching what they see and what they feel and think, if possible, and then turn neurons on and off remotely and essentially shut down your ability to be a human. You're essentially going to become a cyborg. So this is the level of psychosis that this ideology Alan Watts is talking about is leading us to. And it's already here.
But we have been brought up by reason of our two great myths, the ceramic and the fully automatic, not to feel that we belong in the world. So our popular speech reflects it. We say, I came into this world. You didn't. You came out of it. We say, face facts. We talk about encounters with reality, as if it was a head-on meeting of completely alien agencies, and the average person has the sensation that he is a somewhat that exists inside a bag of skin, the center of consciousness, which looks out at this thing, and what the hell is it going to do to me? You see? I recognize you. You kind of look like me, and I've seen myself in a mirror, and you look like you might be people. So maybe you're intelligent. Maybe you can love too. And maybe perhaps you're all right. Some of you are anyway. If you've got the right color of skin, or you have the right religion, or whatever it is, you're okay. But there are all those people over in Asia and Africa, and they may not really be people. When you want to destroy someone, you always define them as unpeople.
Remember, all you Christian pieces of shit. Yeah, pieces of shit. Look at your Bible. You're not people. You're Gentiles. And Gentiles aren't human. Gentiles are to be fucking exterminated at the end of days by the chosen people, which are the Jews, the kings of your religion, and also the bankers that run the world. You can look it up. I've got it. I can put together even more evidence for you. Pieces of shit.
Not really human. Monkeys, maybe. Idiots, maybe. Machines, maybe. But not people. But we have this hostility to the external world because of the superstition, the myth, the absolutely unfounded theory that you yourself exist only inside your skin. Now, I want to propose another idea altogether. And other astronomers either say there was a primordial explosion, an enormous bang millions of years ago, billions of years ago, which flung all the galaxies into space. Well, let's take that just for the sake of argument and say that was the way it happened. It's like you took a bottle of ink and you threw it at a wall. Smash! And all that ink spreads. And in the middle, it's dense, isn't it? And as it gets out on the edge, the little droplets are finer and finer and make more complicated patterns. See? So in the same way, there was a big bang in the beginning of things, and it spread. And you and I, sitting here in this room, as complicated human beings, are way, way out on the fringe of that bang. We are the complicated little patterns on the end of it. Very interesting. But so we define ourselves as being only that. If you think that you are only inside your skin, you define yourself as one very complicated little curlicue, way out on the edge of that explosion, way out in space and way out in time. Billions of years ago, you were a big bang. But now you're a complicated human being. And then we cut ourselves off like this and don't feel that we're still the Big Bang. But you are. You define yourself. You are actually, if this is the way things started, if there was a Big Bang in the beginning, you're not something that is a result of the Big Bang. On the end of the process, you are still the process. You are the Big Bang, the original force of the universe coming on as whoever you are. See, when I meet you, I see not just what you define yourself as, Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so. I see every one of you as the primordial energy of the universe coming on at me in this particular way. I know I'm that too. But we've learned to define ourselves as separate from it. And so what I would call a kind of a basic problem we've got to go through first is to understand that there are no such things as things.
Okay. So let's go back.
You are actually, if this is the way things started, if there was a Big Bang in the beginning, you're not.
So let's look at another guy, Halton Arp. Now, this has been a quiet controversy in science. It's making more noise now as more people talk about it. But Halton Arp's work falsified the Big Bang. The Big Bang's not real. You can get into Halton Arp, and then you've got Cosmology Quest, gets into the other scientists that were involved in this. There's two parts of it and just other interviews by Halton Arp, and you'll find out just how bad the Big Bang is. You can get into Stephen Crowther's work about black holes, and in between this documentary and then Stephen Crowther's talks, you'll start to see that a Jesuit priest made up the Big Bang intentionally to try to make physics sound like Genesis, because there's nothing historically viable about Genesis. Once biblical archaeology came out and people started analyzing it, and then you had Thomas L. Thompson with his books. You have the historicity. By Thomas L. Thompson. No, Abraham existed, and then you can track Abraham back to India, and then you have the mythic past, and this essentially destroys the myth of Israel. Like, Israel never existed in the ancient world. The entire thing's a fucking lie. Fuck you, Christian pieces of shit. So, and Jesus didn't exist. I mean, if it was worth hating you fucks, I would. You're just too stupid to hate. All right.
Something that is a result of the Big Bang. On the end of the process, you are still the process. You are the Big Bang, the original force of the universe coming on as whoever you are. See, when I meet you, I see not just what you define yourself as, Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so. I see every one of you as the primordial energy of the universe coming on at me in this particular way. I know I'm that too. But we've learned to define ourselves as separate from it. And so what I would call a kind of a basic problem we've got to go through first is to understand that there are no such things as things. That is to say, separate things or separate events. That is only a way of talking. And if you can understand this, you're going to have no further problems. I once asked a group of high school children, what do you mean by a thing? And first of all, they gave me all sorts of synonyms. They said it's an object, which is simply another word for a thing. It doesn't tell you anything about what you mean by a thing. Finally, a very smart girl from Italy, who was in the group, said a thing is a noun. And she was quite right. A noun isn't a part of nature, it's a part of speech. There are no nouns in the physical world. There are no separate things in the physical world either. See, the physical world is wiggly. The clouds, mountains, trees, people are all wiggly. And only when human beings get working at things, they build buildings in straight lines and try and make out that the world isn't really wiggly. But here are we sitting in this room all built on straight lines, but each one of us is as wiggly as all get out. Now then, when you want to get control of something that wiggles, it's pretty difficult, isn't it? You try and pick up a fish in your hands, and the fish is wiggly and it slips out. What do you do to get hold of the fish? You use a net. And so the net is the basic thing we have for getting hold of the wiggly world. And so if you want to get hold of this wiggle, you've got to put a net over it. And I can number the holes in a net. So many holes up, so many holes across. And if I can number these holes, I can count exactly where each wiggle is in terms of a hole in that net. And that's the beginning of calculus, the art of measuring the world. But in order to do that, I've got to break up the wiggle into bits. And I've got to call this a specific bit, and this the next bit of the wiggle, and this the next bit, and this the next bit of the wiggle. And so these bits are things or events. Bits of wiggles, which I mark out in order to talk about the wiggle, in order to measure it, and therefore in order to control it. But in nature, in fact, in the physical world, the wiggle isn't bitted. Like you don't get a cut-up fryer out of an egg. But you have to cut the chicken up in order to eat it. You bite it. But it doesn't come bitten. So the world doesn't come thinged. It doesn't come evented. You and I are all as much continuous with the physical universe as a wave is continuous with the ocean. The ocean waves, and the universe peoples. And as the wave, I wave at you and say, you! The world is waving at me with you. And saying, hi, I'm here. But we are consciousness, and the way we feel and sense our existence, being based on a myth that we are made, that we are parts, that we are things, our consciousness has been influenced so that each one of us does not feel that. We feel we have been hypnotized, literally hypnotized, by social convention into feeling and sensing that we exist only inside our skins. That we are not the original bang, but just something out on the end of it. And therefore we are scared stiff.
Okay, so you could look here. I've got a YouTube video or a Facebook article, whichever one you want to play with, that'll discuss how language has no meaning. And I'm sure people, but he said fuck the Christians. I don't want to listen to that kind of stuff. Well, when you believe in shit that doesn't exist, fuck you. Literally. Who gives a fuck what you think? Language. And so I'll show you how language starts as musical stimulation of the baby brain. Because the sound coming out of my mouth has no intrinsic meaning. 如果你让明白中文的时候， 你会听得明白我的说话。但是我觉得好多人，真的美国人不会明白普通话。And so the Chinese I just spoke doesn't make any sense to most people that might view this video. So far, I've got not very many views on my videos. And so, like I said, you've been hypnotized. Well, that's because language has no meaning. You've been taught language, and I'll show the neurology about how it echoes through the default mode network. And then when a preacher sells some bullshit to you, it'll make everybody's brains resonate. You have the same story essentially resonating inside people's heads, defining their reality for them. But the spoken language only has meaning if you've been trained to have it, right? Like the teddy bear doesn't name itself a teddy bear. It never has named itself a teddy bear in the history of teddy bears, right? Woo, my hands. I finally found that camera. Okay, so telling a kid it's a teddy bear doesn't make any sense. Not phenomenally. I mean, it does for identification purpose. Hey, go grab the teddy bear. But it's not a teddy bear. Like, you shouldn't be believing it's actually a teddy bear. It's just a name we use to identify that thing that's, like he said, that's part of the entire universe. And it's not really separate energetically. It's just separate from our experience. And it doesn't actually have a name. The name is just a useful tool. And like I said, the word teddy bear, nothing about the word teddy bear would let somebody who's never seen one understand what it is, right? So I can teach somebody the word teddy bear, and that's the only English word they know, and then put them in a room full of stuffed animals with one teddy bear, and then punish them every time they don't pick up a teddy bear, and they're going to get beaten a lot, especially if the teddy bear is buried under something, right? Because the word teddy bear doesn't actually have any meaning. It's just something. It's just a correlation. It's like a label that we teach people to use. Except we teach people it is reality. We're not teaching them it's a label. We're teaching them it's reality. It's fucked. It's weird. So I'll show you the neurology of it here in language. What is it? Right. So let's cut it off there. I'm about halfway. Let's go ahead and cut this off. And if your feelings are hurt because I said that Christians can go fuck themselves, well, who gives a fuck? Egoproctor out.